The geopolitics of the Middle East, an update on the geopolitics of Gaza specifically and how it's affecting things. Sit down, strap in, grab a cup of tea, even though I have no cup of tea, and hear me out. So, after 2 years of engineered crisis in Gaza by the Israeli state, with casualties numbering in at least tens of thousands of people, including children, of course, not tens of thousands of children, by the way, not 40 imaginary beheaded ones, that made Western headlines and is now a widely debunked claim. Even Western outlets labeled that claim as unverified now after the fact that they reported it and got headlines. After 2 years of actual, verified horror imposed on the Palestinian people of Gaza, a ceasefire was agreed. Regional powers at the administration level, at the state level, they want this ceasefire. An end to the slaughter is needed, not because they have hearts, not because, the administrations care about Palestinians, don't get me wrong, that's not the claim I'm making, don't get hopeful, but because nations like Türkiye and Egypt and Saudi, and smaller powers even, like Lebanon and Jordan, UAE and Qatar and Kuwait and all of them, they have populations, they have citizens, common people, that are losing their absolute minds. So heavily has this crisis weighed on the minds of the natives of the Middle East that their administrations have had to work very hard to try and get peace reasserted in historic Palestine, lest the masses trigger something as extreme as a revolt in each of those governments I've mentioned, to oust their governments in an attempt to better be represented at the state level, at least for this foreign policy matter. Give me a second. So, regional powers have tried to push for peace in historic Palestine for their own benefits, right? I'm looking at this as geopolitically, as analytic, as void of emotion as is necessary to get a full understanding of how these cogs, how these great machines at the great game level work. They want peace in Palestine, or what at least counted as a pathetic excuse for a peace before October of 2023, because, we know by now, if you've done the reading, the research, that pre-October 2023, the Israelis have been persecuting Palestinians day in, day out, stealing land, causing mischief and trouble in the land, to no end. And that was called peace before this engineered crisis in Gaza began. So it was already bad, but that was at least, manageable for the other regional administrations in the Middle East. That at least was palatable for the citizens, for better or worse. One could argue that's a very depressing assessment of what will trigger civilians into action in the Middle East, but that's the reality. Saudis and Turks and Egyptians, they didn't have, at a broad, sweeping population level, they didn't have a particular problem with Israeli actions before October of 2023. Israel for the last 77 years has been causing Palestinians all kinds of injustice and trouble. No problem by and large for the populations. It's only these last 2 years that caused something, and even then it's not really done much to these administrations. They're still in place. They had to do very little to quell their masses. So we'll see how things move forward. So as I was saying, the administrations need peace to keep a lid on the descent, the upset of their citizens. So America came in, the real, boss of all these countries, under whose umbrella all these Western aligned nations sit. America came in, and loads of Muslim powers came in and got that ceasefire done. Israel signed on the dotted line for whatever that's worth. Yet the ceasefire is holding very tenuously, but technically it's still holding. Both sides are saying, yes, we still want that ceasefire. And aid is being restricted once more, despite the ceasefire technically holding. Well, aid was part of the deal, but, Israel. So Israel provides what analysts globally are calling flimsy excuses. That's how you can paraphrase and summarize, saying the Palestinian resistance, this is what the Israelis say, they say the Palestinian resistance forces are not holding up their end of the bargain, right? Israeli soldiers, 2 of them, have been taken out in clashes, apparently, along the new yellow line, a line that leaves Israel occupying half of Gaza still, even during the ceasefire. So Israel got upset and says their adversaries are not keeping to their end of the deal, which means that Israel can not keep to their end of the deal. That was the claim. That's the framing. This is the Israeli claim, despite all living hostages having been released, despite 12 more bodies of deceased hostages having been delivered, even as Israel took out over 50 Palestinians during the ceasefire. It's impossible, basically, to look at the situation objectively and come to the conclusion that Israel is the one that's adhering to the ceasefire better than their resistance adversaries. It's called a ceasefire, yet Israeli outlets confirmed airstrikes, not one or two airstrikes, an airstrike campaign renewed in Gaza during the ceasefire. How are you adhering more to the ceasefire? Anyway. Now, the latest. Egypt is sending their head of intelligence to Israel to meet with US officials and Israeli officials to try and ensure aid can keep flowing and the ceasefire overall holds. Now, before some of you start screaming, Arab sellouts, Egypt is just a bootlicker of the way, before you go off on a mad one, hear out my geopolitical analysis. Not because I necessarily support or oppose the Egyptian state, but because I support the idea of more of us, common citizens, understanding what the heck is actually going on. Then you can go off and do whatever you want. Understanding, though, is step one. So, let's get into step one. Egypt, at a state level, knows the Egyptian people are clamoring for a shift in foreign policy. They don't want that Egypt complies and cooperates with the Israeli state as the Israeli state does unspeakable madness in Gaza. Egyptian people don't want that anymore. But this is not, remember, a democratically elected Egypt administration. This is not Mohammed Morsi. Look him up. He was a democratically elected head. Some people in Egypt don't like Mohammed Morsi. Some people say we need someone, not Mohammed Morsi. But they don't have that option either. Egypt currently has a president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who many see as pragmatic, practical, a reasonably practical operator as head of state. But is he a representative of the Egyptian masses, the common citizen? Far less of a reasonable assertion. Because he took power through a coup and not a people's revolution that the army backed up. No, the army did the coup. It was just the army, right? This is not Madagascar, Gen Z, or Nepal, where they used Discord to vote in their head of state, or Bangladesh, where they have the Bangladeshi Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus as their current head of state. No, this was a military coup in Egypt where the general took off his cap and his, with that shirt or that blazer with all the, wow, look at the pins for all the wars that have apparently, led in. I don't know what achievements. Anyway, he took that power, the general, took off his general's cap, took off all that thing, put on a civilian suit, and now he's the president. Our boy Sisi, right? So the priorities of the current Egyptian state are arguably different from what they would be if the Egyptian people were given a choice, given a vote on what foreign policy position to take as an Egyptian state with regards to Israel. They don't have that choice, for better or worse. I'm just telling you as it is. The people don't have that choice at the moment. So it's not that they're powerless, by the way. Power in Egypt does exist in the hands of the people to some extent. You just have to use it in a different way. You can't, there's no point, and you can't, to a large extent, go out into the streets and start chucking criticism at El-Sisi and flying Palestinian flags. And, this is not the West. You have to operate a bit differently. This is not the way. It's more like Russia or China. You have to operate differently. You have power, but not like that, what I described. So anyway, what Sisi says goes at the moment in Egypt. And Sisi does not want war against Israel or war in the region generally. And he's willing to look the other way for the Palestinian cause as long as the people allow him. If the people get too upset at him looking the other way, he'll have to look back just to keep himself in power. That's how geopolitics works. And the other regional powers don't want war either, just like Egypt. You can frame that. Loads of people do frame that as, they're too cowardly. These administrations, they're too scared. They're just bootlickers. They're just puppets. They're Zayo puppets, muffles. Why don't you understand? That's a framing. You can have that framing. They're too heartless to stand up for the Palestinians. They have no soul. They've given up their Islam. I've heard all kinds. They're too busy counting their riyals. The love of the dunya the love of the world has overwhelmed them. Yes, it's a fair framing. You can have that opinion. I'm not opposing it or supporting it. However you frame it, though, the fact is, which is what I try to deal in, the facts, not the spin. The fact is the administration's fear, the instability, and a threat to each of their countries if the ceasefire doesn't hold. Because renewed fighting means renewed civilian loss of life in Gaza, which means renewed push from Egyptians and Saudis and Turkish citizens and citizens of other nations in the region, renewed calls for these administrations to do, and they don't want to do more. They want to chill. Let me, daddy chill. It's a meme reference, sorry. I don't want to threaten what I've got going here in Egypt. That's the Egyptian administration, right? I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to cause problems. Israel's right there. If I go to war with Israel, you know how much of a fat headache that is. These law might Sarmat Cairo or Alexandria or both. Why not? Not Sarmat, sorry. Samson option. Sarmat is Russian. Look up Samson option if you don't know what I'm talking about. They might just drop nukes, bruv. We don't know anything about this. The diplomacy doesn't apply to them. They're operating on a different wavelength. Their language, ceasefire means sea and fire. We don't. It's a big risk for Egypt to start aggravating that neighbor. Yes, that neighbor's slaughtering our brothers and sisters, ethnically and religiously speaking, but I've got 110 million Egyptians to worry about. That's the Egyptian state framing, right? State understanding, I should say. I've got lovely projects in the pipeline with the UAE. I'm going to build some sort of resort on the coast and all kinds. Türkiye says, I've got $7 billion worth of trade I just cut. What more do you want from me? I want to grow. I want to develop my economy. I want to develop my military-industrial complex. It's kind of going well for me. Drones and Bayraktars and Khan fighters. Give me time, okay? I don't want to get embroiled in I don't want to war my southern border. Potentially Syria going in again and Israel coming to defend itself all the way up north here, hundreds of miles to its northern border. I don't want all kinds of instability that comes with that. Syrians will start streaming into the country again. The South Turks will get upset. Erdogan will think, oh, that's another fat headache I have to deal with. I have to sort of engineer democracy to, it's a mess. It's a headache. Saudi, similar situation. My line, I got to work on my line. It's technically cancelled now, the line project. My NEOM, my King Abdul Aziz Gates, my Vision 2030. I need to keep westernizing. I need to keep paying comedians to be flown out to Al-Mamlakat, the kingdom. I need singers. I need musicians. I need to keep opening cinemas and theaters and restricting where the Quran can be played publicly because, we want to modernize and not Islamize. we want people to get richer. We want people to prosper. Now, the Saudi state, there's criticisms and there's good things that they do. We won't get into that, but everything I just rattled off, it's true, right? Quran cannot be played in the same way, just out into the streets. There's some fatwa, some reasoning, fine, okay, fine. That's how a state works. There'll always be reasons behind what you do. Whether or not those reasons are acceptable, that's another can of sardines, right? But that's what's happening in Saudi. Some people are happy, some people are sad, but that is what's happening, right? It's modernizing, it's westernizing, and the current Saudi administration conflates the two. It says, to modernize, we need to westernize. And that's what's happening. It's not the same as fully, there's no nightclubs in Saudi, but it's definitely a move away from the conservative Islamic Salafi branch of Islam adherence that the kingdom, the Mamlakat, the kingdom is known for, the Saudi Arabian kingdom. It's definitely a move away from that, for better or worse. So, I can't do that. That's what Saudi will say. I can't do that if we all go to war and we all get poorer and suddenly I'm having to, push and pull and turn the taps on and off with my oil and I'm having to worry about Israel defending itself over my airspace and in my deserts, fat headache. So the administrations don't want to deal with that. No administration wants that headache. They want to keep things as they are. Palestinians are over there. Oh, It's not my headache. I don't want to make it my headache. It's blunt, it's harsh. But tell me, am I lying? I'm not. That's the answer. The real question is, what are these administrations willing to do, if anything, to keep Israel in check? Because they were guarantors of this deal. What happened? They're breaking the deal, right? It's a tough balancing act, you see, for these administrations. If you do too much, if you are too forceful against the Israeli state, which would be very new, that's not what these governments do at all. They're not too harsh on Israel. That's the exact opposite of what they are. If they were too harsh, though, there is a fear that it might lead to all-out regional war. Because Israel, if the Israeli boot is on the Palestinian neck, if the Palestinian neck shoves the boot and Israel is off balance, they'll bust out their victim card. Oh, you got me off balance. No, mention that you're off balance because they pushed your boot off the neck of the guy on the ground. But they'll be like, no, I don't care about, don't give me that context. Don't give me before October 2023. I'm off balance now, right? I'm off balance. I'm falling. And he made me fall. So, the administrations don't want to risk Israeli retaliation to even the slightest strong stance taken by these regional powers beyond, words of condemnation. We're condemning in the strongest terms, so strong terms. I've sent 3 emails to Netanyahu. I CC'd in all the Gulf monarchies. That's action, no? Well, yeah, sure. Now, as I was saying, the administrations have a tough balancing act to play. If they do too much, they risk actual response from Israel, and they don't want a fallout. They don't want a war in the Middle East. The Israelis might even be able to bring the US in, saying, "Look, I'm surrounded by enemies." No mention of me actually attacking all these countries directly or indirectly, but I'm surrounded. These Arabs, these Arabs, they're on. They hate me for some reason. I wonder why. Obviously, there's no reason to hate me. Now, the administrations, if they do too little, that's the other side, then their own citizens might revolt against them for their administration's perceived cowardice or inaction or sellout behavior, or the most extreme example is revolution. Unlikely by my assessment, but not impossible, that the citizens of these nations might say, okay, enough is enough, we need better administrations. The foreign policy, the bootlicking of the Western powers that our current administrations do is too much for us. We don't want to lick this boot anymore. Okay, viva la revolution, like the French, ironically, a colonial state in the past. Anyway, time will tell how things turn out. But one thing is for sure, the Middle East is on a knife edge. And when I have more news on the Egyptian intelligence head and any outcomes from any meetings that take place in Israel with Mike Huckabee and the Americans and the Egyptians, if anything is made public, I'll relay it to you. And for the unbiased news and analysis without the Western spin, I'm Mahfouz, and I'll see you on the next one.